Okay. Part 4 it is. I'm going to do one of these and then I'll get to work on some reactions. Starbind Ceremony in the Lower City. As the Starbind Ceremony approached, I spent all my time in the temple. I memorized the words for the prayer, kept up to date on Nicola's progress making natural yeast, and discussed the restaurant's menu and our report to the Archduke with Benno and Lutz in the hidden room in my orphanage director's chambers. Today was a day when Benno and Lutz were visiting from the Gilberta Company, so we were talking in my hidden room. I'll be returning to the Noble's Quarter for the Starbind Ceremony. I'll ask Sylvester about the date and time while I'm there. Yes, please do, Benno replied. We had finished everything that we needed to do before the big meal. Benno's eyes seemed kind of lifeless, but he would have a chance to get some rest beforehand. Well, that should be it, Benno said before letting out a huge sigh of relief and rubbing his eyebrows. Seems like I made it. So what are you doing for the Star Festival? Same thing as last year, I guess. I'm going to be eating lunch in the orphanage. It wouldn't be hard for me to arrange for extra food to be made for Lutz and then join him for lunch, but given how close Benno looked to dying from overwork, I wasn't sure whether Lutz would have the time to look after the orphanage. Are you sure that'll be okay? You're not too busy? Yeah, we finished everything we've absolutely got to get done, and it's not like I can just spend the festival resting at home, you know. Besides, I'll be able to relax more at the orphanage. The food's better there, too. The Star Festival involved the whole city. Everyone who wasn't related to someone getting married, or getting married themselves, would go to pick up town fruit as soon as the gates opened and spend the day tossing them around. Once that was done, they would eat in the plaza and then prepare for the nighttime part of the festival. As such, it wasn't a time when you could just stay at home and relax. You would be chased out and made to help others. Make sure you don't throw all your towels. Save a few, okay? I know, Lutz replied with a grin. He really was the same as ever. But despite everything that would be going on during the festival, I still couldn't see my family no matter how much I wanted to. I had thought that I would be able to see them by having them volunteer to look over the temple's orphans during the festival, but they had to turn me down since they had prior engagements. And Tuli hadn't even shown up once, despite saying that she'd drop by the orphanage every now and again. Tuli just isn't coming, is she? I asked under my breath. Benno snorted, then broke into a huge grin. Tuli's real busy at the workshop. She has a Lahange contract with. Workshop she has a Lahange contract with. Not only has she been studying sewing on her days off, but she's been teaching those in Karina's workshop how to make hairpins. What? According to Karina, she's sucking in tons of technical knowledge at a crazy fast rate. Her last promise to you was that she'd become a first-rate seamstress, remember? I could feel tears well up in my eyes as Benno told me how hard Tuli was working, something I hadn't been able to pick up from her letter. She was dedicating everything she had to keep her promise to me. Your dad's been super busy too, Lutz added. The Knight's Order looked into why a noble from another duchy was able to get inside despite the Archduke's orders, and the commander of the East Gate ended up getting punished for not keeping his men informed of critical information. The commanders of the other gates had all confirmed that Dad had told them the Archduke was absent and would not be providing any new entry permits, and that they had immediately informed their men on duty. And yet, despite him guarding the gate that saw the most traffic and being the first one to have been informed, the commander of the East Gate had delayed telling his men. The Knight's Order had determined that this was an unforgivable error, and since Dad had lost his daughter and worked so hard to capture the noble who had illegally entered the city, he was promoted to fill in the new vacancy. That was great! That's great for him! I'm proud of him. Good job. He was now the commander of the East Gate. He's gonna work a lot more these days. He actually cried about how he barely even has the time to eat with his family anymore. Oof, I can imagine that. Everyone was just too busy to come. Then I slumped my shoulders in disappointment, only to have Lutz flick me on the forehead. Don't feel so down. Tuli already has plans during the festival because she's coming to see you, Lutz said, earning him a wide-eyed stare from me. He grinned and continued. She's gonna wait outside the temple's doors and try to blend in with the married couple's families. When the couples leave, you're gonna be up at the altar in the chapel, right? Tuli had apparently told Lutz that she wouldn't be able to see the new High Bishop if she was stuck with the orphanage kids, and that the whole family was going to be waiting at the doors to see me, even if it was only going to be for a brief moment. Go ahead and show her what you can do, okay? I'll go over all the prayers I need to give once more. Now I could feel the nervousness of someone performing in a class play while their parents were watching. I wanted to do the best I could since my family were going to be going out of their way to come, but at the same time, I was scared of what might happen if I messed up. I said goodbye to Benno and Lutz, the former looking like an exhausted ghost. I feel so bad for Benno. Poor guy is overworking himself. Wonder if Marcus had to step in yet. And then headed for my room in the High Bishop's chambers. Lutz had said that he'd be spending the festival with the orphans, so I needed to talk to Wilma about what the orphans would be doing on the day of the Starbind ceremony. I will now be heading to the orphanage. Who shall accompany me? Please entrust this duty to me, Lady Rosemine. Monica beamed a smile and rushed over to me, endlessly happy about getting to see Wilma. I looked up at Fran. Please continue your work here, Fran. I shall discuss the orphanage's plans for the Starbind ceremony with Wilma. Fran paused his discussion with Zom and nodded. Monica, take good care of Lady Rosemine. Fare thee well. Fare thee well, Lady Rosemine. Fran and Zom both crossed their arms and knelt as Monica and I exited the room together. Naturally, my 2 night bodyguards followed from behind. Ferdinand had been sending his attendant Zom to help Fran with High Bishop-related work as of late, supposedly because Zom had the most experience dealing with the previous High Bishop. Ferdinand always brought Arno around with him, so I hadn't seen Zom enough to have a particularly strong opinion about him. But what I did know was that he, not Arno, would be the main liaison between Ferdinand and me now that I was the High Bishop. Ooh, now she's thinking about it more. I had been under the impression that Ferdinand always had Arno accompanying him, even when dealing with the previous High Bishop, but I wasn't too familiar with what sort of jobs he gave his attendants. This was probably a good change for Fran, though. He had always used to treat Arno like his superior, but now he was talking to Zom as a co-worker. Wilma, Lady Rosemine is here, Monica said once she had opened the doors to the orphanage. I thank you ever so much for coming all this way. Did the High Priest say anything about the High Bishop traveling here personally? Wilma asked, looking worried. It seemed that she hadn't expected that I would continue visiting the orphanage, given that the previous High Bishop had never done so. I am the High Bishop, and I shall do as I please. The High Priest won't forbid me from doing anything as long as I remain safe and am not embarrassing myself as a lady. In fact, when I had gotten Ferdinand involved in the plan to make orphanage workshops in other cities, he had told me to do a bunch of saint-esque work. No way would he protest me visiting the orphanage. I mean, yeah, that's the whole point of them her being marked as a saint, is that she would help the orphanage. So, about the day of the Starbind ceremony. The Blue Priests would be taking all of their attendants to the Nobles' Quarter, the reason being that there wouldn't be anyone to look after them when they returned home otherwise. Ferdinand didn't need to do this as he had his own estate in the Nobles' Quarter with its own set of attendants, but he did it anyway since the others did. Since I'm the Archduke's adopted daughter, I can't bring people into the castle unless I have received explicit permission ahead of time. For that reason, my attendants will all be staying in the temple. Rosina's the only one I can bring. Personal musicians were essential for feasts, which was why I was able to take mine with me to the castle. I could also bring Ella as my personal chef, but throwing her into the chaos of an unfamiliar kitchen preparing for a huge wedding ceremony would be outright cruel. I had asked her what she wanted to do, and we decided that she would stay behind until it was time for me to live in the Archduke's castle. I will have Ella and Nicola prepare the orphanage's food. I've also sent word to the other Blue Priests that despite their absence, their chefs will still need to prepare food as well. Every year the orphanage went without dinner on the day of the Starbind ceremony since all the Blue Priests were absent, but it wasn't as though they were taking their chefs with them. They had chefs at their family homes, so they didn't need to bring their own. That was why I had ordered the Blue Priests to continue having food prepared even while they were gone. In return, I would change how the donations offered up to the temple during the Starbind ceremony were distributed. The previous High Bishop had taken half all for himself, and then given the rest to those who sucked up to him the most. I was planning on distributing it equally, but Ferdinand had stopped me. Noble society was finicky about status and appearance, and considering what might happen after I was no longer the High Bishop, equal distribution was a no-go. What do you mean when she was no longer the High Bishop? You mean when she comes of age, or when she steps down, or... I don't know. Let me know. In the end, we settled on me getting a quarter as the High Bishop, Ferdinand getting another quarter as the High Priest, and then the Blue Priest getting the remaining half. Those who hadn't sucked up to the High Bishop had all fervently agreed, while those who had stayed silent, looking blatantly annoyed. Ha ha. Sucking up to the High Bishop isn't going to work anymore. That means we won't need to worry about food, Wilma said. I truly am thankful for this, Lady Rosemine. Also, Les will be coming to bring everybody to the forest just like last year. Please allow him to eat lunch in the dining hall with everyone else. There shouldn't be too much confusion since it's all the same as what we did last year. Just please watch over them carefully so that they don't disturb those in the lower city. As you wish, Wilma replied, giving me a smile and a nod. Then, as I scanned the dining room, her smile clouded just a bit. If you're looking for Delia, she's napping with Dirk. How are they doing? I had been told by Monica and Nicola when I had first summoned them to make them my attendants that the blessing light had flown to Dirk as well. And while I knew that Delia's life wasn't in danger, I was still worried about her since Wilma had told me she was struggling a lot, and was unable to fit in with the others. They're both doing well. Delia no longer tries to care for Dirk entirely on her own to the point of collapsing, and has learned to ask those around her for help. That said, Dirk has recently started to crawl, and Delia has her hands quite full chasing him around and cleaning up after him. It is now a daily occurrence to see Delia running after Dirk, yelling, "Geez, really? I'm glad to hear it." I sighed with relief, and Wilma gave me the smile of a saint. "Lady Rosamond, I truly do feel blessed to serve you." "Huh? Wilma, have I done something special?" "I know that it must be difficult to serve as the High Bishop at your age, but I am absolutely certain that you will succeed." Wilma gave me a gentle smile as she spoke, and I could have swore that I saw a halo shining above her head. Or maybe in this world it would be the light of a blessing? It felt as though she had given me a blessing even though she didn't have any mana. Wilma seriously is a saint. I have seen a goddess, and her name is Wilma. Oh, yeah, Wilma's a sweet girl. She deserves to have someone good in her life that will treat her very well, despite what she's been through. And so, the day of the Starbind ceremony arrived. Monica woke me up early in the morning, and I quickly finished a simple breakfast. "Lady Rosamond, I'll be going to the orphanage. Say hello to the children for me, Gil." Second bell rang not long after Gil left. As I bathed, I thought about him, Lutz, and the kids who were about to head to the forest. You were really supposed to be given a holy cleansing and a water bath before a ritual, but I knew that would make me sick in no time. Regular hot water would suffice as long as I was properly cleaning my body. "No, Monica, that will lead to wrinkles here, see?" Rosina said. As my personal musician, she wasn't allowed to do the work of an attendant, but since Monica and Nicola were struggling to put my ceremonial clothing on me in the proper aesthetic way, she was taking on the role of a tutor. "Do I put this here and then pull this here?" "That's right, Nicola. Now it looks just fine." I knew that I could wear just anything on the first day I was appearing before the public as the High Bishop, but it was taking Rosina a lot of time to teach Monica and Nicola how to make the clothing look their best on me. I know it's because she used to serve the High Bishop, but now I knew how truly impressive it was for Delia to know how to put on ceremonial clothes from the very start. Yeah, that takes practice, I'm guessing. Once my High Bishop robes were on, a broad sash woven from black and gold thread was slung over my right shoulder and clasped in place with a brooch. The second, much thinner sash that was tied around my waist was also decorated in black and gold, which made it obvious at a glance that this was a ritual for obtaining the blessing of the King and Queen gods. Elvira had given me some hair product, instructing me to do my hair properly like a noble even when I was in the temple. To that end, Rosina was using her experience, having done Christine's hair, to instruct Nicola and Monica on the complex ways in which noble girls were supposed to set their hair. They bound my hair in black and gold cords, then experimented putting my hair stick in at various angles as I tried to determine what would look the best. The hair stick in question was the one Ferdinand had given me for my baptism ceremony. "High Bishop, please move to the chapel," said Zom. I hesitated for a second, not yet used to being called the High Bishop, and Fran immediately stepped in for me. "Lady Rosamond, let us depart," he said, taking my hand and leading me along. I began walking after him, taking care not to step on the hem of my robes. In my normal High Bishop robes, the part by the middle sash was folded so that the hem only reached my knees. But my ceremonial robes were long enough to hide my entire legs, just like the dress of an adult woman would. I was in great danger of stepping on it and falling over. Behind me was Monica. She was walking carefully, the large, ornately decorated Bible meant for the High Bishop clutched to her chest. Meanwhile, Nicola was in the kitchen helping Ella to prepare lunch. "The High Bishop is entering the room," Ferdinand's voice rang out, and Grey Priest opened the door to the chapel for me. The blue priests lined up before the altar waved the sticks in their hands, and the sound of 1,000 bells echoed throughout the chapel. I took the huge, heavy Bible from Monica and slowly walked down the middle carpet. To my right were the blue priests, and to my left were just about 100 pairs of newlyweds. The lucky husbands and wives each wore clothing themed after the divine color of the season they were born in. Those happily leaning against each other were most likely those who were marrying for love, after having grown up together, in the same neighborhood or some such, while those standing expressionlessly were those who had marriages arranged for them by their families. In the worst-case scenario, some of the couples here were only just meeting for the very first time. That sucks. But everyone's expressions changed when they saw me, no matter their personal circumstances. Some dropped their jaws, some looked at each other in disbelief, others whispered among themselves. There probably would have been a huge fuss if sound-dampening magic tools weren't being used like they had been during my first baptism ceremony. When I reached the altar, I handed the Bible to Ferdinand, who proceeded to set it on the top step. The lack of weight in my arms eased my tension a bit, but as I climbed the first step up to the altar, I immediately trod on my robes. Uh-oh. Crap! I could feel the fabric stretching out. I would absolutely fall over if I tried to keep going. As I froze in panic, having no idea what to do, Ferdinand picked me up and set me down atop the altar. "Thank you." It was clear, though his cold smile, that he was calling me a fool. I know, I'm sorry. This is Lady Rosamond, the Archduke's daughter and the newly appointed High Bishop, Ferdinand said to introduce me. At these words, several of the newlyweds stiffened. That was a reasonable response. Anyone would be surprised upon learning that they had just been whispering about the Archduke's daughter. In the midst of all that, Ferdinand began to preach words of celebration and recite a tale from the Bible in a clear, resounding voice. It was a story about how the king and queen gods, the god of darkness and the goddess of light, were first married, the problems they faced, and how they had combined their powers to overcome them. It then turned into a story about them having kids, and when it came to celebrating the marriage of their children, it turned into a lesson about the starbind ceremony. Incidentally, unlike the previous High Bishop, Ferdinand had this all memorized and didn't have to read from the Bible at all. It was the High Bishop's job to recite tales from the Bible, but my voice was still childish and lacking in power. Plus, I ended up running out of breath whenever I tried reading aloud for too long. So Ferdinand was telling them in my place. All I would be doing was watching the people offer up the prayers and gratitude to the gods, then giving them a blessing in return. Now then, let us offer our prayers to the gods. Praise be to the gods. The blue priest assumed the praying pose, then so too did the newlywed couples. I absent-mindedly flipped through a few Bible pages as I would watch over them. What the heck? The words of the prayers are written right here. Hey, Bishop, you cheater! I worked so hard to memorize them. Yeah, he's a cheater. What do you expect? I recoiled upon seeing that in the margins of some pages, the words of the prayers had been written out in handwriting that I didn't recognize. I had been so busy memorizing the words that Fran and Monica had written for me that I had never had the chance to read the Bible in my new chambers. But the words of the prayers were right there. I hadn't even needed to memorize them. As I pouted angrily, Ferdinand spoke again. Now, we shall proceed to grant you the blessing of the gods. Then he instructed the couples to kneel. It was my time to shine. Well, I went out of my way to memorize this stuff. Might as well go all out. I closed the Bible, inhaled deeply, and poured mana into my ring. O mighty King and Queen of the endless skies, O God of darkness and Goddess of light, hear my prayers. May you grant your blessings to the birth of new unions. May those who offer their prayers and gratitude to those be blessed with thy divine protection. Once I had prayed to the married king and queen gods for their blessing, black and gold light swirled in my ring before flying up to the ceiling of the chapel and exploding. It scattered in all directions, raining down on the newlyweds. They all looked up at the ceiling, their jaws dropped in disbelief. Even the blue priests were wearing the same shocked expression. Ferdinand was the only one who remained unfazed. Well, of course, he's seen this like twice already. She gave a true blessing, despite not wielding a divine instrument, a nearby blue priest murmured. Ha ha. I looked at my ring, remembering that becoming a blue priest was the fate of nobles who didn't have much mana, or those from impoverished families who couldn't afford magic tools. Naturally, none of them had magic tools with faith stones in them. Blue priests only had access to divine instruments to pour their mana into, which worked in a similar fashion to magic tools, so it was impossible for them to give a blessing without one. Wait, did I mess up here? I thought, timidly look up at Ferdinand, only to see that he was wearing the grain of someone whose evil plot had just succeeded. Oh, this was just part of his make me a saint plan or whatever. Yep. All part of his plan. Your future will no doubt be bright now that you have obtained the blessing of the king and queen gods, Ferdinand declared, just before the grey priest pushed open the creaking doors to the chapel. A dazzling summer sun reflected off of the white stone walls, brightening the room at once. At the same time, the quieting magic tools lost their effect, and the married couples immediately erupted in excited chatter. Wow, so that's a blessing? He said that that's the Archduke's daughter, right? Apparently that's a blessing from the king and queen gods. The new high bishop's pretty amazing for someone so tiny, huh? This year's the first time that this blessing's happened, right? My brother didn't mention anything like this. Oh, she did something good, considering the high bishop's a big old cheater and couldn't even do it. The newlyweds exited through the wide-open doors, all thrilled by how different the starbind ceremony had been from what they heard and expected. We got a crazy good blessing. I'm totally going to dodge all that towel fruit thrown at us, one man confidently declared as the grooms prepared to guard their brides while running to their new homes. The high bishop shall now depart, Ferdinand intoned. No, I think I'll watch until they have all gone, I replied, staring fixedly through the door. I could see a single family not throwing any cheers to the newlyweds nor searching for a particular pair. They were merely peering into the chapel. Just as Letts had said, my whole family had come to see me as the high bishop. The fact that they were looking all around the chapel made them look completely suspicious compared to the rejoicing couples. It was painfully obvious that they had come for a different reason than anyone else. You're standing out! You're all standing out so much! They looked so funny that I couldn't help but smile. Holding back the urge to call out to them, I thumped my chest twice with my right hand. They noticed that and made the same motion in return. I see, Ferdinand said with a nod of understanding before beginning to instruct the surrounding blue priest and gray priest on what to do next. It seemed that he was going to let me do what I wanted here. While Ferdinand pretended not to notice, I made contact with my family that was for all intents and purposes as direct or indirect contact could be. I touched my hairpin and shook the flowers a bit, making Thule jump with joy. Mom held up Camille in a sling so I could see him. He was moving his head around. And Dad was looking at me with a massive grin on his face. I stayed on the altar until all the newlyweds had gone, and the doors had been closed. By that time, the gray priest had finished cleaning up the chapel, and there wasn't even a single blue priest still around. I felt as though I had just woken up from a happy dream. Ferdinand quickly walked over, his brow furrowed, and lifted me off the altar. He then strode out of the chapel, where he handed me to an already waiting Fran. Hurry up and finish your lunch, Rosamund. We do not have much time. I gave a big nod and said, okay. It had only been a brief encounter, but my heart was filled with warmth at having finally made contact with my family. Oh, that was sweet. Oh, so sweet. Okay, the Archduke's castle. So, Fran, what is the Starbund ceremony like in the Nobles' Quarter, I asked, as I ate lunch in the High Bishop's chambers. Fran's eyes wandered uncomfortably. The same cannot be said for most other blue priests, but as the High Priest already has attendance at his estate in the Nobles' Quarter, there was never much for me to do. His other temple attendants and I would simply wait in the estate for his return. We were given the same food as usual, and while the High Priest allowed us to use our time there to rest, we struggled to relax without any work to do. As a result, we would all usually gather to discuss work-related matters. Well, I mean, that's still resting, you're just not doing any physical work. Apparently, Ferdinand's attendants were all serious workaholics. Yeah. Blame Ferdinand for that one. The fact that he thought he was giving them time to rest, unaware that they were an actual listless and uncomfortable without work, brought tears of sympathy to my eyes. Metaphorical tears, at least. I would feel more at ease staying behind in the temple. The Nobles' Quarter is not a particularly pleasant place for Grey Priests to be, Fran added quietly. I lowered my eyes. It was easy to imagine how much prejudice there was in the Noble Quarter, and the thought made me a little hesitant to go there. As I sipped my post-meal tea, I heard the footsteps of several people approaching my door. Given that the only other room past the High Bishop's chamber was the ritual chamber, it was safe to assume that they had business with me. Rosamund, did I not tell you to hurry? You are the last one to appear. Everyone else is waiting, Ferdinand stated angrily as he strode into my room. Okay. I hurriedly gulped down the rest of my tea, slid off my chair, and exited the room with Rosina. My guard knights, both of whom had been keeping their backs rigidly straight since Ferdinand's loud entrance, were falling behind us. The plan was for me to stay at the Archduke's castle for the night. Karsten and Elvira had already prepared a room for me, having sent over clothes and other such things, so I was told that I wouldn't have to bring much myself. All I needed was my ceremonial High Bishop robes. Rosina climbed into the same carriage as the attendants, while I stepped into one with Ferdinand and my knights. I wasn't sure whether it was because they were of lower status, or because they had been trained as apprentice knights by Ferdinand, but Daniel and Bridget both seemed smaller and more restrained than usual once we were inside. We passed through the wide-open Nobles' Gate to enter the Nobles' Quarter, and then headed over to the massive wall stretching out along its far end. Here we passed through another huge gate, bringing us to the Archduke's castle. Or at least bringing us to where we could see it. It was a radiant, elegant shade of white, seemingly made out of the same material as the temple and the Nobles' Quarter. It looked to be either 3 or 4 stories high from the outside, but as I had previously lived in the lower city where 6 to 7 story buildings were commonly packed together, the castle itself didn't seem particularly large. That was probably why it seemed to lack some oomph for me. But boy, was it big! In fact, there was so much land between the gate and the castle that walking between the two would be a bit unreasonable, even probably for a healthy person. I honestly wanted to ask them to lend some land to the people living in the cramped lower city. The sheer amount of space was probably a signifier of wealth, and I could see buildings I didn't know the purpose of, dotting the lengthy expanse leading to the castle grounds. Probably for servants or something like that, I'm guessing. Oh, I'm about to get an explanation. Those buildings are where the tutors and forest rangers live. There's also farms and orchards, training grounds for the Knights Order, dorms for the knights, and a smattering of gardens for tea parties. Wow! You will be living in the northern building. The western building is where the Archduke's second and third wives will live when he marries again. Wow. So he's only got one wife right now. I watched as the training grounds and beautifully kept gardens passed by the carriage window until we eventually reached the castle's northern estate entrance. The entrance on the southern side was for workers such as scholars, knights, and nobles who had administrative business with the Archduke, while the northern entrance was used by private visitors and the Archducal family. Yeah, anyone would struggle to feel at home if you had to walk through a crowd of busily working scholars to reach your house. While I watched Rosina descend from the attendant's carriage and have the servants take several pieces of luggage from inside. She was the only one who got out, and once our belongings had been taken care of, the castle carriage departed. Ferdinand's attendants were probably heading to his own estate. Once Rosina had prepared everything, the door to our carriage was opened. Daniel and Bridget alighted first, then Ferdinand, who held out a hand to help me climb down. Memories of Daniel's failed attempt immediately flashed in my mind. I looked down to make sure that I could reach the steps, only to earn an immediate scolding from Ferdinand. "Don't look down," he murmured quietly so that no one else would hear. "I have to. I'll fall if I don't watch where I step." Hello? Especially if she's still wearing those ceremonial robes. Hello? She tripped over the stupid things. Why do they have to be so dang long? I protested in an equally low voice. Ferdinand briefly closed his eyes, then hefted me into the air and set me on the ground. "Thank you." I gave him a bright smile and said, "I thank you ever so much," but all I did was sigh. All he did was sigh. Why? I mean, she just explained it to you. Do you want her to fall? No. That would be equally as embarrassing. No, probably worse. The northern entrance had opened in the meantime, and I saw several people coming out to greet us. There would normally be a lot more, but everyone was busy due to the starbind ceremony. The butler-esque older man at the front knelt down, and all those behind him followed suit. "Welcome home, Lord Ferdinand, and I presume this is Lady Rosemine. May I pray for a blessing in appreciation of the serendipitous meeting ordained by the vibrant summer rays of Leidenschaft, the god of fire?" "You may," I replied. "O Leidenschaft, may my young mistress be blessed. It is a pleasure to meet you, Lady Rosemine. I am Norbert, and I am in charge of the attendants in this castle. I look forward to serving you." A fluffy-looking blue light flew toward me as he spoke, which I accepted into me. I hadn't been wrong to think that he looked like a butler. He pretty much was one. "I am Rosemine. I trust you to serve me well." Norbert stood once he had finished his self-introduction and turned. "Now would the reassigned knights please step forward?" I froze in place, having no idea why my knights were suddenly being reassigned until Ferdinand took it upon himself to explain. As Daniel and Bridget are both unmarried adults, they must attend the nighttime feast that follows the starbind ceremony. It is about time for them to be getting changed in the night storm. Oh, I see. It wasn't hard to guess that the feast would be a place for unmarried people to search for partners, just as the lower city's nighttime feast was. For today, I would be assigned apprentice knights who had not yet reached adulthood. "Cornelius, Angelica," Norbert called. Two apprentice knights sharply stood up and stepped forward. One was Cornelius, my older brother, and the other was Angelica, a young-looking girl who seemed to be about Cornelius's age. She had light blue hair and dark blue eyes. It was clear that Bridget was a female knight from the striking aura around her, but Angelica hardly seemed like a knight at all. She was an adorable little girl with lithe, slender features. I would have more easily accepted that she was an attendant. "These are Cornelius and Angelica, who will serve as your guards," Ferdinand said. "You already know Cornelius, so I shall spare you his details. As for Angelica, you can consider her to be your guard for the noble's quarter. Her appearance makes her quite fitting for standing guard during feasts and tea parties." His words were enough to me to trust that Angelica was skilled enough to be a knight, but the fact that she was such a pretty little girl still made the thought a bit jarring. The knights switched places, and I began walking through the castle. All around me were pure white staircases and equally white hallways that stretched into the distance. The only interjections of color were the carpets spread across the floor, which were blue to represent the divine color of summer, and the tapestries hanging on the walls. Nobody explained what was behind any of the doors we were passing. We climbed to the second floor, and while walking down yet another hallway, I saw a separated mansion through the window. I pointed at it, and Ferdinand explained that it was the northern building. This was where the Archduke's children lived once they finished their baptism, and it was connected to the main castle through a hallway that joined onto the second floor. I assumed that was where we would be heading, but Norbert stopped at a nearby door instead. "Please follow me. I shall introduce you to your attendants, Lady Rosemine." My two guards stood beside the door, while Ferdinand and I entered with Norbert. It was a parlor-esque room that had a bench, several chairs, and a table, near which a truly old-looking woman who seemed like a physical manifestation of the word Granny was standing. Ferdinand's mouth twitched slightly the second he saw her, an unusual reaction for him. "Riarda, are you to be Rosemine's—" "That's right, Lord Sylvester personally asked me to look after her." As I looked between Ferdinand and Riarda, whatever, Norbert took a step forward to introduce her. "Lady Rosemine, this is Riarda. She will be your head attendant here." "I appreciate your service," I said, giving the courtesy that Elvira had drilled into me. Riarda broke into a grin. "I see that Lord Karstedt has raised you right. I always like to see someone who has such good manners, Lady Rosemine. I am Riarda. It will no doubt be a pleasure to serve you." Riarda? I'm assuming it's Riarda. Let me know in the comments. Said before beginning to shout out instructions. "You're Lady Rosemine's personal musician, yes? I've heard from Lord Sylvester that you're very skilled. Norbert, take her to where she needs to be. I know that you need as many musicians as you can get today. Norbert crossed his arms over his chest. At once, Riarda. I entrust the rest to you. At that, he exited the room with Rosina. He would apparently be taking her to a meeting of musicians preparing to play at the feast. Now then, my lady. It's time for business, Riarda said, and I reflexively stood up straight. First, bathing. We will need to adjust your hairdo to match current trends. Once you are bathed, you will change clothes and eat with the family. Then you will change into your ceremonial robes and attend the Starbind ceremony. Once the ceremony is over, you will return to your room, bathe, and sleep. Any questions? For a second, I assumed I would only be changing my clothes, but hearing Riarda mention bathing made me realize something. I needed to ask whether they had rinse sham here. I hadn't forgotten how dry and gross my hair got when washed with soap. Excuse me, Riarda. I need something called rinse sham to wash my hair properly. Could you ask my mother to prepare some? Without it, my hair gets dry and brittle. I would rather have an outdated hairstyle than damage my hair by using soap. Riarda's eyes widened as she listened, and then she let out a cackle. A precocious one, aren't you? My. Well, then consider it done. Could you ask Lady Elvira to handle this, Ferdinand, my boy? You're going to make the high priest run an errand, Riarda, and you're calling him my boy. Holy cow, it does not suit Ferdinand at all. I'm willing to bet that she was like his, like his nanny when he was younger. So this is actually funny. I looked away from Ferdinand, holding back the urge to laugh. Seeing the look on his face now would absolutely make me burst into laughter. Riarda, could you stop calling me boy already? I will when you get married, my boy. Ferdinand is losing. Wow. Riarda's incredible. I still wish I could laugh right now. I'd be rolling around pounding my fists against the floor, which would be very unladylike. Ferdinand, no doubt having figured out what I was thinking, shot me a cold glare before walking to the balcony and morphing his face down into a high beast. He jumped onto it, and off into the sky he went. I figured he'll be back in no time. Let us have tea while we wait, Riarda said, having already started to prepare some. Riarda, may I ask what your history is with Ferdinand, Sylvester, and my father? I tutored Lord Karlstedt since he was a little boy, and then I was Lord Sylvester's what? Okay. I was Lord Sylvester's wet nurse. It was more than a little tough for me since they both just loved to move around. Neither one would ever sit still. I've known Lord Ferdinand since he was a young boy, too, going all the way back to when he was first brought to the castle. Wow! To think there existed a powerhouse who's known the whole trio since they were kids. Riarda was the widow of an archnoble and already had grandchildren. Once Sylvester was too old for a wet nurse, she continued serving him as an attendant and had now become my attendant at Sylvester's request. I just hope I haven't taken away one of the few things keeping our berserk archduke under control. Yeah, here's hoping. We waited for a short while, and soon enough, Ferdinand returned with a small jar. He landed on the balcony and turned his high beast back into a face-stone before coming inside. Thank you kindly, my boy. How many times must I ask you to stop? No matter. I will be going to Sylvester's office. Riarda, look after Rosemine. After observing the very rare sight that was Ferdinand running away, wearing an uncomfortable grimace as he did so, she's gonna laugh hysterically once she goes to bed tonight. Or when she gets a moment to herself. She's gonna laugh hysterically. I would imagine I would. I'm surprised she hasn't started laughing yet. I was taken to my room in the northern building where the Archduke's children lived. Here we are, milady. Boys stayed on the second floor and girls on the third. It was set in stone that boys would leave the building when they came of age, with the next generation's Archduke moving to the main building while the others moved to residence outside the castle. Girls, on the other hand, were technically allowed to stay until they got married. At the moment, Wilfred and I were the only ones living here. Well, I mean, I think he only has one kid, right? We entered through the second floor hallway connecting the building on the main castle, which led us to a staircase. When I looked around, I noticed that there were knights standing in front of a door a little further in. That was probably Wilfred's room. I instinctively glanced around for Lamprint, but then remembered that he was an unmarried adult noble. No way would he be here. He was definitely busy preparing for the feast. I went up to my room on the third floor, which was located right beside the stairs. The second I opened the door, I could tell that the inside had been prepared by Elvira. It was just like my room in Karlstedt's estate and in the High Bishop's chambers. In other words, it was very cutely decorated with red and pink flowers. You must feel right at home here, Riarda commented as he led me to the bathing room. She speedily stripped off my clothes and then started roughly washing my hair with the rinse sham, quickly getting out the gel or whatever it was. I could feel it run down my face as Riarda dumped hot water on my head. Opening my mouth now would be a disaster for sure. I sat perfectly still, feeling like a vegetable being washed before getting chopped up. You make it so easy, Lady Rosamine. Couldn't be more different from those little rascals. She had apparently bathed Karstedt and Sylvester the same way, as her eyes were wrinkling with nostalgia. It was kind of heartwarming to see her love showing so clearly on her face. Goodness, your hair is so silky. Is this because of the Ren sham? Indeed, after you've used it once, you can never go back, I said, recommending the Ren sham to Riarda. Please wear this at dinner, she said, looking through the wardrobe and taking out a fancy dress that Elvira had prepared for me. Given that today was the Starbind ceremony, I would need to wear clothing that was even more proper than usual. She secured my hair again, using the gel stuff, then pushed in a hair stick. It was the one that Elvira had ordered from the Gilberta Company. Never seen a hair ornament like that before, Riarda said, peering curiously at the hair stick. That reaction all but confirmed that me wearing this as the Archduke's daughter would start a massive hair stick trend. Sorry, Benno. I know you're getting so much needed rest, but I think you might have more work coming your way soon. Yeah, but he doesn't have to necessarily deal with it himself physically because he's not making the hair sticks, but he's going to get a lot more money coming in. Once I was changed, Riarda guided me to the dining hall where Sylvester and Ferdinand were already seated and discussing something. She took me to the seat beside Ferdinand. So you've come, Rosamine, Sylvester said. Hello, Father? Lord Sylvester, it's been a while. May I ask you a question? Just stick with Sylvester. Drop the Lord part, though. Gotta maintain some distance for political reasons, but not too much. And sure, go ahead. What's your question? I went ahead and asked him what time and on what day the Italian restaurant gathering would take place. Sylvester may have had a date settled in his head, but he hadn't told us anything. Everyone's going to be busy tomorrow recovering from the festival, yeah? And on the day after tomorrow, I'll be busy seeing off the nobles who got married. So that leaves us the day after that. We'll go to the temple at 3rd bell and then move to the eatery at 4th bell. Understood. Is there anything in particular that you would like to see on the menu, or anything that you don't want to see? Just give me stuff I've never eaten before. How am I supposed to know what you've eaten before, Sylvester? Something like what I ate at Spring Prayer will do just fine. I knew that Sylvester liked unique things. The planned menu seemed like it would go down just fine. As I asked about the things that Benno had wanted me to double-check, Florencia entered the room, and then, when our conversation was about done, Wilfred entered. His expression softened with relief when he saw me. As expected, he really had been torn up over what had happened during the baptism ceremony. Once Wilfred sat down, Sylvester stood up. Looks like everyone's here. Let's get started then. Wearing a sharp expression, befitting an archduke, Sylvester gave divine greetings before proceeding to discuss the Starbind ceremony, among other things. In the meantime, waiters were busily, yet gracefully buzzing around the room serving us food from large platters. Sylvester had said that everyone was here, but Wilfred's younger brother and sister were nowhere to be seen. It was just Sylvester, Florencia, Wilfred, and myself, with Ferdinand as our only guest. Ferdinand, where are the other kids, I asked. Those who have not had their baptisms are not allowed to attend, he replied. As unbelievable as it sounded, noble children weren't even allowed to eat with their families before they were baptized. It was apparently forbidden for them to sit with adults until they had been taught proper manners. I probably only considered that such a bad thing because I had loved eating with my family so much. A childhood spent eating alone felt sad somehow. But I was apparently the only one who thought so. Everyone else here was a noble who had been raised that way. Even Wilfred was standing upright at the table. Nobles were taught that they must not stand up until the meal was over. Back during my baptism ceremony, disaster thankfully hadn't struck until the meal was already done. For today only, dinner began before 6 bell. It was fairly early as far as dinners went, but this was a formal dinner that lasted longer than normal, and for good reason. It was the last meal that people who were getting married had with their families. Once the meal was over, Charlotte and the newly 2-year-old Melchior were brought into the dining hall by a wet nurse. They were both tiny, and I couldn't see them while seated. Good night, Father. Good night, Mother. Sleep well, Charlotte and Melchior. They embraced and said their good nights before immediately leaving. According to Ferdinand, that was the only time they ever saw or interacted with their parents. It was such a dry and barren exchange that I could barely believe my eyes. Good night, Father. Good night, Mother, Wilfred said while standing up before immediately leaving as well. I did the same, and together we started to make our way back to the northern building. Wilfred was going to be stuck in his room again, but I needed to change straight into my High Bishop robes and head to the large assembly hall where the Starbind ceremony would take place. When we reached the stairs and it came time for us to go to our separate ways, Wilfred let out a murmured, It's good to see that you're doing all right, Rosamine. Sorry about all that. Everything turned out just fine thanks to Ferdinand's healing and potions. I'm sorry for worrying you. Looking relieved at having gotten the chance to apologize, Wilfred headed to his room. I climbed the stairs to return to my room, only to find Riarda standing in wait with a bundle of clothing in her arms the second I stepped to the door. Now then, milady, let's hurry and get you changed. More newlyweds are arriving as we speak. I'm gonna miss this. Nope, I'm continuing. I'm sorry. Starbite ceremony in the Noble's Quarter. Attili, undo her sash for me. There was another attendant sitting in wait with Riarda, a woman who looked about the same age as Elvira, and seemed to be called Audley? Whatever. They both worked together to take off my dress, and all I could do was stand there and let them do their jobs. My shoes were changed, and my ceremonial high bishop robes were put on me. They both worked super fast, no doubt being very used to changing the clothes of children. Nicola and Monica had struggled to get me into my ceremonial clothing that morning, but Riarda and Attili had dressed me in no time at all. Well, they're used to this. I watched in the mirror as a smaller sash was tied around the beautifully pleated robes, and the larger one was placed diagonally across my chest alongside a ton of other decorative ornaments. When the box of ornaments was empty, Riarda took a step back and looked me over before giving a firm, satisfied nod. As I looked in the mirror, I noticed that there was only one part of me that remained unchanged. I reached up a slow hand to touch my hair stick. I wanted to switch it out for the one my family had made me. Riarda, may I ask you to swap this hairpin for that one over there with the summer colors? No sooner had I asked than Riarda switched them, thus completing my outfit. And off we go. Riarda guided me to the big assembly hall. Cornelius and Angelica naturally followed as my guards. Eek! Careful now. On my way down the stairs, I stepped on my dress and would have fallen had Cornelius not instantly reached out and caught me. I thank you ever so much. My normal robes only reach down to my knees, and I still haven't gotten used to walking in these longer ones. You need to hitch it up a little as you walk, milady. Riarda hitched up her own skirt a bit and then took a few steps to demonstrate. I had assumed that it was forbidden, as I hadn't seen anybody else doing it. But apparently it was fine to raise the hem a little. But just as I thought that this would make things a lot easier for me, Riarda latched out another warning. Be careful not to hitch it up too much. You don't want your legs showing. I didn't care about people seeing my ankles since my normal robes only went down to my knees anyway. But I kept my protest to myself. Riarda stood on top of even Ferdinand. I had absolutely no chance of winning against her. I hitched up my skirt a little as I walked, taking great care not to step on the hem, only to have Riarda stop in front of me. Wearing a frown. Excuse me, milady, she said before bending down and picking me up. I blinked in surprise as she walked off at a speed much faster than I would have expected from an old granny. If we keep going at your pace, 7th bell will ring before we reach the hall. Yeah, you're still slow, girl. 7th bell was apparently when the Starbind ceremony started, and Riarda had determined we'd be late if she let me keep walking. But honestly, it really wasn't my fault. The castle was just so ridiculously big. The distance between the northern building, that is, the living quarters, and the public assembly hall was way too far for a child to walk. And then there was the fact that we had to take a bunch of turns instead of going directly toward the hall, which made the journey even longer than it needed to be. I had half a mind to demand the carriages be allowed in the halls. Oh, that would never happen. Riarda carried me almost the entire way to the assembly hall, setting me down a short distance from the hallway leading inside. She looked me all over to make sure my clothes hadn't been creased or anything. This is as far as I can take you, milady. Walk straight down the carpet and up to the altar at the end. Lord Sylvester will be there. Okay. I turned the corner to see a big hall illuminated by shining things that looked like lamps. Candles were used as sparingly as possible in the lower city to save on wax. So it was standard for everything to go pitch black once the sun had set. But here in the Noble's Quarter, these tools that worked like lamps were used plentifully, though they weren't as bright as, say, the ones powered by electricity on Earth. The pure white walls made everything feel much brighter. It certainly is bright in here. You don't have these in the temple? They're magic tools that amplify the small light from candles. Cornelius explained as we walked. I nodded. The doors leading to the assembly hall were wide open, and I could already see a ton of people gathered inside. The High Bishop has arrived, announced a voice. The assembly hall had a massive, ceiling-like gymnasium and was divided into two by a black carpet with gold edges. Newlyweds and adult unwedded nobles were waiting on either side, talking among themselves. I faced forward and walked down the carpet as quickly as I could, feeling a whole room of curious eyes watching me. But despite my best efforts, I was still walking far slower than most people would appreciate. Something that was made especially clear when I heard Cornelius whisper a supportive, "You can do it." I began to climb up the altar when I reached the end, and thanks to being able to hitch up my skirt, I managed it without stumbling. Thank goodness. That alone made me feel as though I had completed a huge, arduous task. "Over here, Rosamund," Sylvester said. He was calmly sitting in a chair atop the altar as Riarda had said he would be. Karstad was standing behind him and motioned with his eyes for me to take the seat beside the archduke that had been prepared for me. I did just that. "Rosamund, where is your Bible? How are you going to perform the ceremony without it?" Sylvester asked, his tone incredibly worried. Ferdinand hadn't written the Bible on a list of things that I had to bring to the nobles' quarter, so I hadn't even considered it as something I would need. I knew the words to the prayer, and Ferdinand will be reciting the tales from the Bible himself. There won't be any problem at all, I explained, and Sylvester Seton appeared to visibly relax. As long as you can give the blessing. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be the one reciting the tales. I see. Now that I was atop the altar, I was free to gaze around the assembly hall like a teacher looking over their class from the podium. Oh, there's Ferdinand. I see there aren't any women around Ferdinand. Why is that? I could see women watching him from a distance and squealing in excitement, but none were actually trying to approach him. Maybe everyone found out what a nasty personality he had? At this rate, it seemed unlikely that he would ever escape from Riarda calling him a boy. Only a fool would take this opportunity to find a romantic partner and waste it talking to a celibate priest, Sylvester said. Honestly, it made perfect sense. The only question I had was why in the world had Ferdinand bothered to join the crowd at all? Rosamond, do you want Ferdinand to get married soon? I'll bet he's working you to the bone in the temple and piling tons of work on you. Must be rough. Actually, it's quite the opposite. I would be in more trouble than anyone if Ferdinand quit being the high priest. I know this would be very unfair on him, but I would like him to remain single until I come of age at the very least. Yeah. I scanned the crowd looking for any other familiar faces and noticed Bridget standing alone by a wall. She seemed uninterested in joining the crowd, but I didn't know whether that was a good thing for her. What happens if you don't find a marriage partner here? Depends on your family and why you couldn't find a partner. You're talking about your knight, huh? Finding a partner is going to be real tough for her, Sylvester said with a frown as he looked over at Bridget as well. Why is that? Family stuff. According to Sylvester, Bridget's father had died 3 years ago, at which point her older brother, who had only just come of age, inherited the position of Gabe Ilgnir. Bridget was engaged at the time, but the man she was due to marry and his family saw weakness in her older brother's young age, and planned to take control of the entire Ilgnir house. Finding that despicable, Bridget expressed her displeasure and put an end to the engagement. While their families were about the same status, the man's family had more experience in a variety of fields, and were more than a few cunning schemers among them. To this day, they were giving Bridget's inexperienced older brother as much trouble as they could. Although she had saved her family from being taken over by canceling the marriage, her choice had also ended up putting her brother through enormous hardships, which made her incredibly depressed. Bridget had requested to be my guard knight before anyone else, wanting to gather as much influence as she could to help her older brother, even if she had to go to the temple and the lower city in the process. Her unyielding determination gave her the strength to go somewhere that all nobles hated, all to protect her family and the lives of her province's citizens. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to the story, which caused Sylvester to look at me with shock. Why are you crying? What was about that? What about that was worth crying over? That kind of thing happens on a daily basis, doesn't it? I mean, I'm just weak to stories about strong family bonds, especially right now. The father was also recognized as a central pillar of the family in the lower city, so most fell upon hard times when he died, especially when his successor hadn't been fully raised yet. Benno had only just come of age when his father died, and had mentioned that not only had most of his employees quit, but he had been regularly tormented by the guildmaster. If a commoner merchant had that hard of a time, then I can only imagine what a Gabe who had to lead an entire province could go through. I had no idea that Bridget was in such a bad situation. Father, Sylvester, what can I do to help her? I asked Karlstadt and Sylvester respectfully. Her situation might improve a little if you can introduce her to some good houses, but given her personality, that's not going to be easy, Sylvester said. She's pretty self-conscious about how people see her, but at the same time, she doesn't really fit in with everyone else. Just look at what she's wearing. That should tell you everything you need to know. I took a closer look at Bridget. It was pretty easy to guess that she was wearing something trendy, as her clothing looked similar to what tons of other women were wearing, but the style definitely didn't suit her very much at all. It seems like she's chasing after trends to avoid looking out of place, I observed, but the clothes don't look good on her, so she ends up looking half as pretty as a result. In all honesty, Bridget looked way cooler and more attractive in her usual night gear. Yeah, she's tall and muscular, so girly outfits don't compliment her at all. Now that's not true. Plenty of girly outfits would look just fine on Bridget, assuming they were the right style and color. Though everything that comes to mind would go against current trends. Alright, in that case, how about you make the trends? Women don't have long to get married. It's said that a girl who's still single when she's 20 will be single for the rest of her life. That's asking a bit much. I can't just up and make trends in a snap. I puffed out my cheeks in a pout and tried to think of more clothes that would look good on Bridget, all the while continuing to scan the crowd. I had a feeling that Daniel would be having just as hard of a time as she was. Lampert wasn't too hard to spot, considering that he was tall enough that his head poked above the crowd of women surrounding him. It seemed he was so popular that he would have to have his pick out of just about anyone he wanted. There was no need for me to worry about him. I see that my dear brother Lampert is surrounded by women. Do you think he'll be married by next year? I imagine he'll be single for a while longer yet, Karstead explained while staying on guard. He fell in love with a girl from another duchy back in the Royal Academy, and she's not of age yet. There's a chance that her family won't actually let her marry him when she does come of age, so it might not happen at all. Wait, is this a long-distance relationship? And what was that about an opposed family? Is this Romeo and Juliet? I needed more details. There was no romance in my life, so I lived vicariously the love lives of others. Is it just me, or is Eckert not here, I asked. I've been wanting him to move on and look for a new wife, but it seems like it's going to take him some time to heal, Karstead replied. What? Nobody told me about this. Eckert had apparently married once before, but his wife had passed away. Oh. I imagine that was real recent, too, because I think, isn't Eckert the younger one? Right? Isn't he the 16-year-old, or is he the 18-year-old? Oh, if he's the 18-year-old, then that wasn't very long ago, and if it was 16, that was even less long ago. I was getting a little concerned about how little I actually knew about my new family. It's still a sensitive issue for him, so it doesn't come up. Rosamund, please take care not to talk about Eckert's marriage or his late wife. Of course. I continued looking for Daniel as I mulled over all the shocking revelations that were being dropped, but the crowd was so thick I couldn't see him. I had no idea where he could be, but just as I got increasingly serious in my search, seventh bell rang out. Sylvester smoothly stood up and took a step forward, flourishing his cape behind him. Now begins the starbind ceremony. All newlyweds step forward. 8 couples entered the assembly hall. Their outfits had much fancier designs and used more gorgeous cloth than the outfits I had seen in the lower city this morning. But the colors still matched the season the wearer was born in. The couple started to walk forward, keeping a set amount of space between each pair. Cheers, claps, and pleasant words of celebration filled the room, contributing to the joyous atmosphere. Once the couples were lined up in front of the altar, Sylvester began to recite a biblical tale in a resounding voice. It was fairly abridged compared to what was written in the Bible, but he definitely had it memorized. The old high bishop really had been a complete and utter failure. Oh, definitely. Once he was done retelling the story of the god of darkness and the goddess of light, Sylvester began calling out the names of those getting married. Bernadette, son of Baron Glaus, stepped forward with Lagrette, daughter of Baron Blonde. Ooh, Baron Blonde! I remember him. That was, I think that was one of the places you stopped at for spring prayer. Okay. The named couple climbed the steps of the altar. Sylvester confirmed that they wished to get married, then handed them the pen-like magic tool that he had used when signing my adoption papers. Once they had both signed the contract spread in front of them, it disappeared in a small burst of golden flame. Once all 8 contracts had vanished, loud cheers echoed through the hall. The High Bishop shall now bless the newly joined couples. It was finally time for me to do my job. I stood up and walked forward to stand beside Sylvester. Go a little nuts, he whispered, though I could hardly hear him since he was so much taller than me. It seemed that he also intended to push the legend of Rosamund the Saint. I poured a bit more mana into my ring than I had back in the temple and took a deep breath before raising my hands and beginning to pray. O mighty King and Queen of the endless skies, O God of darkness and Goddess of light, hear my prayers. May you grant your blessings to the birth of new unions. May they who offer their prayers and gratitude to thee be blessed with thy divine protection. Black and gold light swirled in my ring before shooting up in the ceiling just as it had in the temple. The 2 beams of light twisted around each other before eventually bursting into tiny specks of light which scattered and rained down onto the newlyweds. Oh! Odd voices filled the assembly hall, followed by a brief moment of silence before the hall erupted in cheers once more. Judging by the mix of surprise of joy on the newlyweds' faces, it was safe to say that my prayer had been a success. The High Bishop shall now depart. May she be blessed for granting such a large blessing despite her youth, Sylvester declared. All those present took out their shining wands and held them up, making them shine even brighter with mana. It looked exactly like concert glow sticks, and while it was a pretty sight, I felt deathly embarrassed knowing they were all for me. Walking calmly in the midst of all that was too great of a task for me, I sped across the carpet as quickly as I could manage, wanting to flee from the source of my shame as soon as possible. That's not shame, you're just embarrassed. The large doors to the assembly hall closed once I had passed through them. What followed would be a feast that only adults were allowed to attend. The knowledge that my job was now done, coupled with the fact that I would normally be asleep by now, my body feels suddenly heavy out of nowhere. Are you alright, Rosamund? Cornelius, I think I have reached my limit. Cornelius hardly picked me up, knowing full well that I could pass out at any moment. But despite being a lot bigger than me, he still didn't have the arm strength to carry me very far. Sorry, Angelica, but could you hurry and call Riarda for me? Angelica gave a firm nod and was gone in the blink of an eye. A second later, she came running back. Riarda will be here at once. Thanks. I owe you one, Angelica. My, Riarda exclaimed as she rushed over a brief moment later. She hefted me up and began carrying me back to my room. Now, if you aren't just the easiest person to carry, light and docile, how about that? Riardo was apparently more than a little strong thanks to always having to catch Sylvester and lug him back to his teachers when he was a kid, or drag him out of bed and into his office whenever he tried to avoid work. Aha, Sylvester, you were giving everybody trouble. She told me various stories as we made our way back, then set me down when we eventually reached my room. I could feel myself teetering the moment my feet touched the ground. My lady, you have to bathe before bed. I just wanted to jump into bed and go to sleep, but Riardo refused to let me sleep while the gel was still in my hair. She and Ottilie stripped off my clothes before putting me in the bath, and I rested my head against the tub as they washed my hair with Friend Shampoo. The hot water was making me more and more sleepy. Careful now, my lady. By the time I was out of the water and having some kind of scented oil put on me, I was already falling asleep. Wake up, my lady. You have to wake up, Lady Rosamine. Okay. I continued to sway sleepily as they washed away the scented oil, rubbed me dry, dressed me in my sleeping clothes, and then supported me from either side as they guided me into bed. The next morning, I ended up bedridden with a fever. Ferdinand, my head hurts. Bedridden as expected, I see. Ferdinand had come to see me right after breakfast. Although the plan had been for us to return to the temple that morning, he had predicted that the tight schedule would be enough to make me collapse. He was completely right. Why are you so calm about this, Ferdinand? Riardo demanded. She only had experience raising abnormally healthy children like Karstedt and Sylvester, so seeing me collapse with a fever out of nowhere and for no real reason was throwing her off big time. Her voice had come out sharp as a result, whether she intended it to or not. Completely ignoring Riardo's scalding remarks, Ferdinand held out one of the potions that had been hanging from his wrist. She performed 2 religious rituals, each of which required a significant amount of mana on top of spending an entire day moving around. It was more than obvious that she would end up bedridden. She needs only to drink this and get some rest. What do you mean she only needs to get some rest? If you know that she was going to get sick, why didn't you stop it from happening? This is the kind of situation where you should be putting that big brain of yours to use. Riardo barked quite unreasonably. Maybe being raised by her was the reason why Sylvester had such unreasonable expectations of other people. Riardo, it is an unfortunate fact that Rosemine's poor health cannot be planned around. It is inevitable that she will fall ill no matter what you do. If there was something that could be done about it, then I would have done it already. He was wearing a troubled expression and had his hand placed on his forehead, but Ferdinand gave an explanation to Riardo rather than simply silencing her like he would anyone else. He really couldn't win against her. I reached up from my bed and gently tugged on Riardo's skirt. Riardo, please don't get mad at Ferdinand. He made sure to brew a potion that would help me get better. He's a bit of a meanie, though, and refuses to improve the nasty flavor. My. In that case, drink up and get some rest, my lady. With a small grin, Riardo took the potion from Ferdinand. The gradient liquid inside swished about as she handed it over to me, and the condensed smell of a potion pierced my nose the moment I opened the small bottle. The bitter taste that I had been forced to consume so many times before immediately arose in my mind like some kind of nightmarish phantom. It terrified me, but I steeled my resolve and gulped the potion down in one go. The quicker the pain was over, the better. Well, it doesn't taste that bad. It was bitter, to be sure, but not so much that I wanted to roll around on my bed, flailing my limbs in misery as I had before. Hearing my whisper, Ferdinand shot me a glance. I improved the recipe, though it seems that was out of character for a meanie such as myself. Ugh, gosh, Sylvester, Ferdinand, how do you do it? Intelligent and kind, my goodness, what a shining example of a good person. Oh, that glare stings. I hardly dived into my covers to avoid Ferdinand's sharp, piercing glare. Yeah, you complimenting him like that is making him feel annoyed. Okay, I'm going to have to end this here, and I'll see you all next time.